Do you also track any kind of religious extremism? Do you see it on the rise?
It's been going down as a percent of the sector of what I look at. So think of my aggregate numbers as like a stock market index. The religious component has been going down.
Mhm.
Um, it's big, but it's going down. Now I'm bringing in some more stuff. I'm bringing in some stuff from YouTube, and that doesn't sound like a place where you would go to look for extremist stuff because of content moderation. But one of the things I had noticed doing this was that there were a lot of identified extremists who were not on working on extreme sites. And the content moderation on YouTube was really about election denialism and COVID conspiracy theories. But if you were a religious speaker, you kind of got a pass unless you did something, like people who would get kicked out on the religious sector would get kicked out because they would start making personal attacks on people. So there's one minister started calling people in his church who disagreed with him witches and named them by name on his YouTube channel. Like YouTube said, no, you can't do that. But sort of general religious discourse that was extreme. If you were on YouTube, you usually didn't get kicked off. So we're going out and trying to find more of that.
Mhm.
That could change my views of what's happening there. But also keep in mind in religious communities, although there's not a lot of accountability, especially for these non-denominational pastors, they are now facing opposition on the web. So it's probably the most extreme pastors don't care. But if you were a little more middle of the roadish and you kind of start going down this path, and suddenly people are on the web saying, "Hey, Pastor so and so said this, that was wrong," you might rethink what you were doing.
Mhm. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's hard. The one thing we did find with religion, so we have a bunch of frames and stuff like that. General religious discourse, even in this sector, is not radical. So if
Mhm.
you believe in God or angels or salvation, things that most religions have, right?
Yeah.
Um, you're not violent, and that's kind of consistent with what we see in all kinds of research. So, you know, if you are a religious person, you're less likely to use drugs, and if you did use drugs and you go to rehab, you are more likely to be successful. They're small effects; they're not big effects.
Mhm.
And so that's showing up consistent even in this sector. It's really the hyper charismatics that stand out as something different. That's a very different kind of discourse. Um,
Is it
so
religious also? Is there a religion component with the hyper charismatics?
yeah, so the charismatic group, charismatic, basically, we think of them as people who speak in tongues, religious communities that are speaking.
Okay.
So they're speaking in tongues.
So what I was going to ask is, I hear so much about this idea of like Jesus coming back, and I know that every religion, every major religion believes in Jesus coming back at the end of time. So I wanted to know how much of that you hear in extremist groups, or how much of that is a focal point in some of these groups, or is there any group that
We could do a whole show on this.
then
So
maybe we
that
should do
was,
that. Maybe we
yeah,
should do that.
so that was when I started this whole project. That was central because I've written about millennialism and prophetic beliefs. It was tied to my doctoral dissertation, and QAnon was getting tied into all of this. So I that was at the foundation of that, and we do oversample prophecy websites. Right now, many of them do not look extreme.
Okay.
So it's really more of a kind of misinformation. And I'm comfortable in saying that these groups are always wrong, right?
Mhm.
Um, and every September we have another round of Jesus is coming this September. Specifically, September and October are target months. That they're always wrong. It's institutionalized discourse in the West. It's been that way since about the 16th century, tied to Puritans. In the United States, there was this quasi millennial vision as people came over where they would think of themselves as recreating the Exodus story on some level, not literally, but going into the wilderness to create this civilization. And so it was often tied into apocalyptic and millennialist themes. So we do see a lot of that. Now, there is this exception. where uh, it's hard to get into all the real technical points here because I'll probably bore everybody. But there is this idea that in order to bring about the kingdom of God, we have to bring it about ourselves rather than wait for Jesus to do it. That's not a new idea. Many people would say that's the idea that we've lived with since the time of St. Augustine. So it's not a new idea, but there's this wrinkle about what would it be to bring about the kingdom of God. So there are people who have added violent themes in there, and um, there are a lot. The term that will come up is spiritual warfare. So
Mhm.
spiritual warfare that they're taking certain Bible passages, and usually spiritual warfare means I have to fight temptation or something like that. Or if you go to a church, you'll hear people come in and say, "I was late to church. The devil must not want be here." It's spiritual warfare.
Mhm.
The
And
concern
it
is
becomes
that
the same
yeah
concept.
it becomes a term that's used to cover like any bad thing that happens to you. The concern is that there's some people who have weaponized that discourse to use it um,
Yeah.
in this context. I don't know that they have everyone on their side
Hmm.
because this other view that it's Jesus that's going to come and do this stuff is really well entrenched. So they not only have to, the spiritual warfare folks, the extreme spiritual warfare folks, not only have to spread their belief, but they have to dislodge people from this other belief system. So we can have long talks about that other belief system and how it came around and how it shapes U.S. foreign policy, but um,
I mean,
the,
this may be a
there's
topic
not.
for a whole podcast by
Yeah, there would, and there's no. Um, it's not necessarily violent. It's less violent than I thought it would be. I thought that this would be very
Mhm.
violent,
Oh, okay.
and it might be skewed from my YouTube viewing as well because I would be deliberately seeking out these violent people.
Hmm.
But in the data, even in this extreme sector, those people running around saying Jesus is coming back in September, they're not necessarily
Hmm.
promoting violence alongside of that.
Yeah. I mean, it was just that I've been seeing so much of that. We have to do certain things, or certain things have to happen for Jesus to come back sooner. So we
Yes.
should expedite this process by doing this and this. So I mean, I hear that from different groups. So I was just curious.
Yeah, so it's the expediting is where this is an issue, and I'm saving you technical details, but there was something that appeared in 2020 and reappeared with Gaza, where
Hmm.
there are people saying we got to have a worldwide revival before Jesus comes back, before the rapture, and you know,
Hmm.
and uh, that revival has not happened. It should have happened. Why did it not happen? And then we get into the extremism. That well, the way we're going to make it happen is the enemies of the revival are Joe Biden and the Democrats, right? So we need to get rid of them.
Hmm.
I don't know that we hear a lot in that particular strand. It's definitely there, but I hear a number of people who will go right up to the edge and they'll say, I believe this is terrible. I believe that we're moving down the path to a one world government and the Antichrist is right around the corner. And what is the solution? We're supposed to pray.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's not harmful, right?
Yeah, I mean, in the Muslim world, you mostly hear that, oh, this is the end of times, everything is just getting all distorted, or it's our old ways are all changing. This is the end of the world, and but there is not this concept of expediting the process so that Jesus comes back, because Muslims also believe that Jesus will come back, right? But I do
Right,
hear
right.
about this story or this narrative that certain things need to happen to expedite the process.
Yeah, and it used to be the view that we bring about the kingdom of God. The old Augustinian view meant that you were supposed to, you would see secular progress, or you're supposed to do works of charity. So the social workers would succeed and get rid of poverty or something like that.
Mhm.
Uh, the violent strand had not been there of that.
Mhm.
I don't think it's large. I do think that some of the people who have espoused it have a big megaphone.
Mhm. I see.
And so we hear it disproportionate to the number of people who actually hold it.
All right. Well, thank you so much
You're welcome.
for
Interesting
sharing.
conversation.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was very interesting to hear about all this. So thank you for taking the time.
You're welcome.
And
Have a great day and enjoy Halloween.
thank you. Happy Halloween.